checking our feed, and we are live. Hello, everyone. Welcome to season 2 of the Bite Back Tour. Last year, we visited different cities and provided a bunch of content to everyone watching. This year, we're going to try something different. Yes, we're still going to create healthy communities and make them more bite-free, but we're also going to bridge the gap between you and experts that have an impact on what you do day to day and maybe where you work. In this episode, we're going to talk about 21st century science education. Are we ready? And joining me, we have special guests with us. We have, first up, Dr. Kelley Lee. She is an author, a Rise Up nonprofit co-founder, director of the UCI Science Project, and 10 Strands board member. Welcome aboard, Dr. Kelley Lee. Next, we have Dr. Hueling Lee. She is the executive director of Authentic Preparation Today. And for the past 4 years, she has been collaborating with the California Department of Education to develop and support the State Seal of Civic Engagement. Welcome, Dr. Hueling Lee.
Thank you.
And we have Mrs. Gina Ayala. She is the 2021 Public Health Teacher of the Year. Woohoo! She has been teaching for 13 years, 10 years at Clifton Middle School in Monrovia, California. And she is a diehard Seahawks fan. Welcome aboard, Mrs. Ayala.
Go Hawks, and thank you for inviting me. I'm really excited about today.
And we are excited to have you all on board as well. Just in our agency here, though, we have myself, Pablo, Carol Ann, and Christian, and a special guest from a different department in surveillance is Kim Nelson. Hi, Kim.
Hi, everybody.
All right. Today, we got a jam-packed lineup for you, and we're going to just go ahead and kick it off really quick in discussing about our district in a bit, in a small amount of time, just so you get familiar with what we do generally. So our official name for our agency is the San Gabriel Valley Mosquito and Vector Control District. It's a very long name for something very simple goal that we do, and that is to prevent mosquito-borne diseases in your community. And we do that in a variety of ways. We have operations department. They're the ones out there tackling the public sources, making sure that there's no stagnant water. And if there is stagnant water present, they treat it appropriately. And they're the guys and gals that are in the field that you see driving around all day. And they also are quite active in the winter. Here in Southern California, we have very mild winters. So we definitely have a lot of mosquito activity in places you would never expect. The other department is the communications department. At the end of the day, education is key. We always say you cannot spray your way out of a mosquito problem. That is because mosquito control is a shared responsibility between everyone, from you, the viewer, to us here in mosquito control. And lastly, we have surveillance. They are our source of data, and they're the ones that set out traps routinely and for special projects to test for any mosquito-borne diseases that exist in the community. And right now, I'm just gonna say welcome everyone. If you're actually watching on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, or on our website. If you want to, drop in a question or comment and we'll try and get your question answered. And this is the educator episode. So most likely you are an educator watching now. So definitely drop in any question you have for our panelists coming up in a second. But first, I want to toss this over to Kim, who will talk a little bit more about something called an OV trap. And it'll make sense in the end. So if you stay tuned and stick with us, you'll see why we talk about an OV trap. Hint, it has something to do with what students can possibly use in a citizen science project. So Kim, what is this OV trap, or what does that do and how do you use it?
Well, OV traps are just simply a cup that we set out throughout the district, and we use it to check for the presence or absence of eggs. And so what we would find in the cups are eggs that are from the Aedes mosquitoes. And these Aedes mosquitoes can actually transmit specific diseases such as Zika, chikungunya, or dengue fever. And so it is very important for us to set these out all around the district so that in the event that there is an outbreak, we can see if this Aedes mosquito is actually present in that area of the outbreak. If it is present, then we can make sure that our specialists go to these areas and treat them to decrease the number of these mosquitoes. And it's a simple setup that we can put all throughout the district in a short period of time, where we stick a cup, put some water in it so that when the Aedes mosquitoes want to go and actually lay their eggs, they will come. We put some germination paper that we just roll up and we stick inside the cup. Fill it with water. And when the mosquitoes come and land in it, they actually lay their eggs onto this germination paper. After that, we leave it there for a week, pick it up, and then we collect all of them. We put the name and the location of where we found it, and we're able to see if there are eggs on the paper or if there are not. The presence of eggs will tell us that it could possibly spread disease in that area. The absence of eggs tells us that we don't have to worry because that disease cannot be spread in that area because there are no mosquitoes that can spread that disease.
Thank you so much for sharing. So it's a simple tool that happens to have a huge impact in how it gathers data for us. And this is the kind of data that we can possibly even have students share and utilize as well. Thank you so much for the little highlight of the OV trap. Hello, David, you're watching on YouTube. Thank you for joining us. And let's move on to the panel discussion. So this is going to be open forum and open floor to our education specialists, Caroline and Christian, and also to Dr. Hueling Lee, Dr. Kelley Lee, and Mrs. Gina Ayala. So we have the first question we want to pose to you, and this is a question I'm sure a lot of educators ask. What is the role of STEAM education in an ever-changing world? And feel free to anyone if you want to just pipe in right off the bat.
Well, I'll pipe in because, hey, it's education. So STEAM, I'm sure all the educators who are watching understand science, technology, engineering, art, and math. And that just encompasses, as a science teacher, what is the role of science? I mean, what better time is there since I've been alive that science is so important? I mean, when it comes right from the inundation of science terms and technology and understanding in our news every day, just dealing with, COVID, shows you how important STEAM education is. We're living it. And in some way, trying to find the silver lining of the whole COVID situation is students are seeing firsthand how important the understanding of science is. So COVID kind of puts it there, but that's just one little part of it. So when we were able to introduce this whole idea of, mosquitoes carrying disease, I'm saying, hey, we're just investigators, just like the doctors studying COVID, we're studying, Zika. So I think it gives a lot of relevance to what's happening in their classroom.
I'll piggyback back onto that. I think a lot of the STEAM education is really about preparing our students for kind of real world pieces in terms of understanding what the reality is and kind of looking at what the reality is and how to kind of use the tools in education to deal with what's unknown. Kind of where our understanding is not just based on hunches, but on truths and finding the truths and finding facts and kind of leveraging the critical thinking to kind of find the answers, whether it's kind of for COVID, for kind of the environmental issues that we're dealing with. It's about kind of having the tools to deal with the reality and the problems and issues that exist really.
Oh, and evidence. Yeah. When you brought that up, it made me think of there has to be evidence. We teach claim, evidence, reasoning, and working with vector control, you just showed the paper and the eggs. Hey, clearly there's evidence. It's there. Look at it. You went out there, you found it. This is evidence. And I think that's really important. It's actually something they can see and analyze.
And cannot deny.
Yes. And I would even add to that, right? Like it's also analyzing problem and using it to problem solve, right? To look at like the issues that are going on, maybe in their community, looking at COVID, looking at all of these different things and seeing like, oh, I can actually do something. I can take in this piece of information and this piece of information, figure out, what does this all mean? And then take action. So I think that's also very important.
And I think also science sometimes seems a mystery to people. They don't really sure how it works. So I think it's really important for students to get a taste of that as early as possible so that they understand the processes behind where these answers come from.
And just to add to what everybody's saying, a couple of my thoughts are, you know, this question is asking about an ever-changing world. And education is evolving, has evolved for a long time, but the practices that are taking place in the classroom haven't yet caught up. And the truth is that sometimes teachers don't know what they don't know. So we're here talking about Zika, we're here talking about mosquito vector control. But if you're in the classroom and you're, you know, caring about the day-to-day, never mind the time it takes to teach the class, develop the curriculum, and have time to research about all these things, how do you find out more information? So when we're thinking about how to support our teachers in thinking about what they possibly don't know that researchers are uncovering still today, I think partnerships with our local organizations like this one is so essential in getting the information out. And I think it's important that our educators remember that you don't have to know everything about a topic to do something about it. And when we talk about current issues of today, it's essential to remember that, again, the information is ongoing. It's still being collected. However, we can model that process of science and learning and complex critical thinking with our students. We don't have to have all the answers, but we can show them how we might be more critical in finding those answers, right? Because we know that critical media literacy is so essential. If we're trying to find information for ourselves and Google is just this endless resource, how do you know what's credible and what's not? Which organizations should we lean more into, and which ones, again, you know, might we want to be more mindful of as we're thinking through how to solve this or gather data and evidence with students?
You know, many of you have touched on this topic a little bit, but I think the next question an educator may ask, well, then what are some of the 21st century needs and issues facing students from your perspective?
Well, 21st century needs and issues, what comes to mind immediately to me was when we were all sent home when COVID first hit. And the immediate need was access to internet and having computers, because we found out real fast that not every kid had equal access. The so-called digital divide was very real. And, you know, thanks to, you know, COVID money that was doled out, we have been able to mitigate some of those circumstances with getting Chromebooks and getting hotspots set up, but it's not 100%. So to me, that was the first. When you talk about 21st century needs, absolutely, 21st century, you got to have digital access.
Yeah.
I think kind of what COVID brought to the fore as well is this kind of the need to pause and kind of reflect and kind of think about what's most important, and really kind of because I think there are a lot of mental health issues in terms of dealing with the fear, the anxiety, and all that's going on. So I think if we think about the learning that needs to happen, and part of that is kind of fed by, I think, you know, Dr. Kelley Lee mentioned it in terms of the false information that's out there. There's a lot of misinformation that's happening, and that kind of feeds into the fears and insecurities and anxieties that exist. So I do kind of come back to the idea of what's truth and what's fact and what's deeper learning, in terms of not taking the simple, easy answers based on sound bites and, you know, gifs and memes that's out there, but actually delving deeper to kind of looking at the problems in terms of understanding the root causes of those problems and actually having civil discourse around the problems that exist, in order for us to kind of, you know, have that deeper learning for students.
Yeah, and there's a saying, right? Listen with the same passion with which we want to be heard. So we're here as educators, as the adults, and we're trying to figure out the needs of students today. But how often do we allow for students to speak up for themselves? Or how often do we position them in the classroom as change agents, right? Do they have opportunities to co-construct that information with their teachers? there's just a lot of history and backstory when we think about why education is the way it is, why some teachers are still teaching, in very specific ways. I wouldn't even say traditional. It's just that as educators, we've gone through a system and we've succeeded through that system. So there are obviously things that we feel are working for us. But the question is, and I wanted to point out to what Gina said earlier, is a question of equity, right? Is that system, is that approach really working for everybody? But we need to hear from the students themselves. And so as we're thinking through the needs of 21st century, I also want to encourage all of us to remember that, with this pandemic, which at some point, hopefully soon, will become an endemic. And then, from that point, we'll regulate and move on its normal course. And hopefully we get back to some sort of normalcy. But there is a future to be planning for. And there's a lot of different research and science that shows that even pandemics such as this one are related and are symptoms of a larger issue, like the climate crisis and deforestation and what's happening. There's just so much that we can go on about. But at the same time, the problem is an issue is tending to the needs of what's happening right now, but also thinking far into the future, to the future that we all want, a more just future for our students, and thinking through how do we get to that point? And then as teachers do, we backwards plan, right? So again, I just want to point out, I would love to hear more from our student advocates. And we know with these types of issues, they're at the forefront advocating for their rights to learn about these issues. But the question is, when do we get to catch up? When does that curriculum meet the needs of today? And more importantly, what supports do we have for our teachers? Because it's not fair to just put it on them to be able to do all this and the day-to-day, right?
And many of you have touched on COVID-19, the pandemic, but there are also other issues kind of drifting in the background, and usually it kind of floats into our minds, and sometimes it's then mandated to be taught in the school, such as climate change, depending on the state you're in. So from your perspective, this is to all the panelists, in your perspective, are educators currently addressing climate and environmental literacy and action in the classroom today to meet 21st century issues? Why or why not?
Well, it's a big question, and from my perspective, we ask a lot of our classroom teachers, and they all have to hit certain marks. And Gina, I'm sure, can speak to that. But that's part of the reason why we're offering what we're offering, is to provide some alternative ways of learning about some of these really important issues that are affecting all of our lives. And this is all related. The climate issue is related to all of the other aspects, including COVID, and why we're in the predicament we are. So, I think that it's important for other similar agencies to ours to offer some alternatives to, that teachers can draw from to increase environmental literacy.
Well, I can assure you that in science, we've had a shift in standards. There used to be a California state science standards, and our school has adopted, NGSS, or next generation science standards. And within those standards, there are, particular units on Earth and the changing climate. I know that's where I had at the end of even the 6th grade year, and then it's weaved in through 7th grade and all the way through 8th grade. We've taken the integrated approach at our school with the next generation science standards, and Earth and the changing climate are part of that. So it wasn't before, but we have adopted. So we're moving forward, and that makes me hopeful. And it's very much something that kids are aware of. They've heard about it. So we do get to go deeper, and that's a kind of an end of a year thing we always point towards. So after we brought in everything else, then we kind of end up with focusing on Earth and the changing climate.
And I've seen a lot of teachers get really creative where they're like teaching interdisciplinary lessons, right? With like either the English teacher or the government or econ teacher to try to like bridge the gaps between how, just because you're talking about climate, this isn't just science, right? Like it's affecting the way that it affects our economy. It affects the way, policies are written and things like that. So I definitely think teachers are talking about this, and sometimes you just got to get creative with the way that you implement it in your curriculum.
I think that's great. Sorry, go ahead, Kelley.
Oh no, sorry. I was just to share, the research right now for what's happening across the United States is that teachers generally, if they teach about climate change or environmental literacy, take about 1 to 2 hours per year to cover it. I have no idea how one would cover the climate crisis in an hour. But when I do think about that, there's hope in that it's being covered, but to what degree and what is being said, that's the question. If there are no supports out there for our educators to really think through what the large problems are and how intersectional they are, because it's highly complex, you're left teaching to what your personal beliefs are about climate change. That could be anything. And so that's the first thing. Educators definitely need support in taking this on. And the second thing is that, our surveys are showing that American public, nearly 80% of the American public feel that it's an educator's job to teach about climate change in the classroom, but that's not what we hear in the media. The media portrays it as a 50-50 split. It's highly controversial. And so I think there's a lot of hesitancy for talking about the ethical dimensions of climate change. You can definitely talk about the science of it, but the question is, when you get to that point and students are now wondering, what do I do with this information? How can I take action? If it leans too heavy into the politics, that's when teachers start second guessing, well, what's my role here? Is that a social science teacher's role? Do I leave it to them? What if I don't collaborate with them? Do they ever have opportunities to take action? And the actions themselves, are they culturally relevant to that community? Because those closest to the issue are also closest to the problem. But again, there's so many different ways that we can approach this. And with NGSS, climate change is written indirectly. It's in nearly 30% of all the standards, whether again, indirectly or directly. But as you're thinking through the NGSS, most teachers that we work with are very honest about it. They say, yeah, it's integrated. We generally talk about it during human impacts. But more often than not, our teachers say our human impact unit is left for the end. And what happens when we don't have time to get to the end? We just cut it out. So my question is, can we have a more intersectional approach to these 21st century issues that are not left to one unit, but really intersectional in ways that students can see it's not across only other subjects, but also in the topics that I learned today. When I learn about photosynthesis, can I learn about it in rich context for what's happening today, rather than just the process of photosynthesis, because I need to know about the content? Where's that rich context that grounds my learning? So I'll stop there so I can make space for other people, but it's just something for us to think about.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Dr. Kelley. And I did see you had posted some links. So our panelists will occasionally post links if they want to, and we can make sure that we post those and share with those watching at bitebackchampion.org on the website. If you're watching, this is the Bite Back Tour Season 2, first episode, and it's focused on the educator spotlight. So the theme is 21st century science education. Are we ready? For those of you who are tuning on Twitter, thanks for bearing with us. We just got the feed back up. So I know those of you had commented you couldn't see anything. Well, we are up live now on Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, and also on our website. Changing gears here just a bit, I'll pose the next question. Talking more about public health, and how are educators, from your perspective, panelists, how are educators helping students see the nexus between science and public health outcomes? Do the standards emphasize this link sufficiently?
Well, you mentioned, do the standards emphasize this sufficiently? Right away, from what I know of my standards, I don't see that in the standards really, but more to address the first part of that question is the nexus between science and public health. Well, obviously working with San Gabriel Vector Control, that was my very much in your face, this is science and this is our community and this is what can happen with mosquitoes. I mean, that was it. that was, to me, it was when I first heard about that program, actually having something students were doing in their community that was scientific. They were out there being their, vector inspectors and just bought into this whole idea and were happy to be part of it. So educators such as myself working with a community organization, because as mentioned earlier, I'm no expert. I certainly learned a lot. I turned to the experts and I've learned a lot. And I'm happy to let my students know that I don't know everything, but I can find someone who knows, and try to teach them that skill. So as far as, I know you had the previous question up.
Hey, Paul, if you go back to the previous one, you moved ahead.
Yeah.
There you go.
So I can't say clearly that the standards are emphasizing that link, but by reaching outside of, pre-planned curriculum and to move into the community and have students be able to work with something like a vector control agency, I think that was a great nexus between science and public health outcomes.
Well, we certainly enjoyed working with your students, and we look forward to being able to do that again. Hopefully we can get in and, do something in person so that they're, really able to kind of get excited about it. And your kids by far are, so engaged already. So, I'm looking forward to being able to work with them again. But I think it's really important for them to feel like they have control over their environment, and there are things that they can do that are fairly simple that make a huge difference. So.
Well, what really helped with that too is what Carol Ann's agency, what they did after my students got water samples, they posted what they saw. So can you tell a little bit more about you posting all their samples? And so the kids got to go onto the website and see it, Carol Ann?
Yeah, that was Padlet. And so the samples came back to our lab and we were able to get them under the microscope and post pictures of what we saw in the water, and then we could publish it on Padlet. So for the kids that were involved in VIP and the kids that turned in water samples, we were showing not just mosquito larvae, but also other living organisms that were in the water. And then when they turned in their OV papers, we could show them what the eggs look like magnified. So the hope is that we can, then have middle school kids do that with the equipment in the classroom and actually analyze their own, the evidence that they've gathered. So, there's the Padlet there. Yeah. So each kid had their own agent number, and then we were able to show their particular sample and what we saw in it, and the various microorganisms, including mosquito larvae. So I just think, it's looking through the microscope is like seeing a whole different world. And that's so exciting for kids.
And for us, this was so much fun for us to be able to upload these videos and see, what kids are literally having in their backyards. So it's not just for the kids, it's also for adults. We can learn a lot.
Well, it's exciting for me too, because as a vector ecologist, this is what I do daily. This is what I'm going out in the field and I'm collecting these water samples. And I wished when I was younger, I would have had the opportunity to learn about how to do this and to be able to have that educational background to connect to vector control and to know that I can look through the microscope and see this whole new world of information, and to see all these kids and students putting together these projects and collecting their own water samples from their own backyards or in their neighborhoods gives me hope. And it shows me that if they can do it, we can do it. And it shows how important our jobs are. And it helps to create that bridge where they now know that these jobs exist in the future so that they can continue helping and promoting public health.
I think that kind of, I think the experiential or kind of, real coming back to the real world learning and being able to actually engage with the learning, not just kind of knowledge being poured into the student's child, is so incredibly important. And I think that's what the NGSS standards is trying to encourage, is, to Kelley's point, kind of more interdisciplinary learning, more project-based learning. And hopefully, if they can kind of get out into the community and actually be able to kind of engage not just with their mind, but also their heart, in terms of what does that mean? How does that impact my community? How does that impact my life? And be use their hands as well too, right? To actually have kind of these hands-on learning experiences. And those of us, who've been in education know that learning, when we learn stuff, it's not just somebody pouring knowledge into our heads. It's about, kind of learning more holistically in terms of all the different aspects of how we can interact with it. And that's what we'll actually remember. And to Kim's point, these experiential learning pieces will impact kids so much more. They will remember learning these things much more than if they just kind of heard a teacher, kind of pour that knowledge to them, hoping that they would absorb it in some way.
Well, I think it boils down to just instilling a sense of wonder. I mean, when you look through that microscope for the first time and you see these animals and these other living organisms that you haven't seen before, it's almost like going to another planet. And I think that the emotional aspect of that kind of learning really gets it into long-term memory. It's just, and so I think it's so important to allow kids to explore that way. So that's why I just love the water samples and looking at the larva up close, because it's almost like going to another planet. And so you have that sort of emotional reaction with kids, and you see them going, you hear them.
And Caroline, you touched on it by talking about Padlet, but I want to open up to the other panelists too with the next question of from what you've seen, what strategies and or technologies are teachers using to excite and motivate students to perform science practices and skills?
I don't have a response for that one real quick, but I just wanted to add on to what everyone is saying here, and that the reason why it's so exciting as well is because you're in a sense demystifying the field of research, science, engineering, all of these things I think in a child's mind that seems so mysterious, right? You're giving them a more authentic way to engage with the curriculum. Right. So for me, I always remind myself, when we're thinking about these types of experiences, is the dog wagging the tail or is the tail wagging the dog? So what is driving that learning force for a child? Is it that you have to just pour in and cram in all of this content information for memory's sake and then give some context to relate it to? Or can the context itself be what the student is investigating and bought into and replicating those authentic experiences? But again, I have to point out that your organization is amazing in that you're providing those authentic experiences for teachers and students in ways that are accessible. And so when we think about it that way, I would hope that like the following conversations would be, if other organizations are out there listening, that they continue to provide opportunities like this. So when teachers don't know what they don't know, they know, just like what Gina said, they know who to turn to learn more.
And when you mentioned what strategies teachers are using to excite kids, I think everybody would agree that's watching is the hands-on activities are what excites them. And on top of doing science, not just learning science, but you do science by collecting water samples, or you do science by dissecting a flower, or you do science by dissecting an eyeball. One thing that has been that I've kind of done a flip. When I first started teaching, I'm like, how some teachers will teach you all about the structures of an eyeball, and then you get to dissect the eyeball at the end. No, what I do is day one, you're taking apart this eyeball. Everybody then has a shared experience. We took apart this eyeball. Look at all these parts. And then as we go through to teach them the science, everybody in the class goes, oh yeah, remember that really squishy stuff, that vitreous humor? Oh yeah, remember that thing that looked like an olive? That's an iris? Oh wow. Because they've all seen it. They've all touched it. So it's the same way if you teach them about, water samples, there's stuff in water. Look at this stuff. Now let's learn about it. So I think that's a strategy of like letting them all have a shared experience together first. And then when you go back to, there are some stuff that you have to like teach skills, they can refer back to something together as a group, because normally kids come in with such a vast, different experience in life. I grew up on a farm. I know all about, animal breeding and farming, but my own children grew up in the city. They know nothing. So I think that's a great strategy to like have a shared experience at the beginning of a unit, and then you can go backwards after that.
Yeah, I agree. Absolutely. You get that excitement started at the beginning, and then they want to learn, and they can connect their experience with what you're then telling them.
I feel like all of our conversations so far. I'm sorry, Dr. Hueling, you got one more thing to add?
Well, I totally agree with all these points in terms of, kind of the tangible pieces are so important, and to kind of remind that learning is not just kind of this almost like 1 or 2 dimensional piece, but it's actually 3-dimensional, and it's interactive. And I also come back to core components of sense making for kids as well too is, why are we learning about this? And so what? Right. So again, it's not just knowledge for knowledge's sake, but for what purpose are we learning? And, what can we do about it? Because I think the piece about impact is also pretty important. And I come back to, we're trying to promote this whole state seal civic engagement piece where we're really kind of encouraging kids to learn how to be civic participants in the world, right? For what purpose are we learning? Well, we're learning so that we can actually make an impact in the world, to make a positive impact in the world. And so how do we apply the learning that we're doing? Again, we're not learning for learning's sake, because that's not really fun, but we're learning so that we can actually help others as well too. And we're by being able to kind of help us at the others at some point in time, we're actually kind of happier individuals. So although it doesn't get to the squishy eyeballs as well, but I think, we kind of get to, the bigger picture as well too, in terms of, how does that feed in, we could zoom in terms of like, microscope and kind of seeing the piece, but let's zoom out as well too of, so what can we do about some of the things that we're learning? And I think it's really important to kind of have that bigger picture and kind of remind kids of the bigger picture of, kind of why they're doing what they're doing.
Right. Yeah. So later on, when they grow up, they can make informed decisions. They'll be faced with these decisions. If you don't have the information, how can you come to any kind of a informed decision? So,
or they can be doing it right now, just like with your project. The kids are actually helping their communities in whatever age they're in right now. Yes. They're making a difference. And it's important to kind of remind them that they can make a difference no matter what age they are.
Right. And just like teaching those transferable thought processes and skills so that they can take that anywhere.
Thank you all so much for chiming in. The discussion has definitely evolved to a point where I believe we're ready to move on to the next little topic. We do have 5 minutes left in our episode. We want to be mindful to our panelists' time. But moving along a little bit, we'll have to throw it over to Caroline and Christian to talk a little bit more about the citizen science projects that we offer and how that kind of ties into this whole discussion, and maybe ties into what Kim was showing at the very beginning with the OV cups.
Yeah, so back when I started, 15 years ago, I had to ask myself, why is vector education in classrooms important? And I quickly realized that students can act as public health ambassadors to their families. So it's another avenue of getting information out to the public via sort of these student ambassadors. But they also, backyard mosquito control is something that students that's just something that they can do, they can accomplish. And it also gives them the opportunity, as we've said previously, to apply real world science solutions to problems that are right around their homes. And it instills a sense of community involvement and civic engagement. So our science programs are very much mindful of the next generation science standards. And I just want to let anybody who's listening and considering giving us a call to remind them that these are free. So they're free science programs for schools and residents within our San Gabriel Valley Mosquito and Vector Control District boundaries. And we offer these year round to K through 12 students. And if you're an informal educator, maybe you run a scout troop or you do summer programs or some sort of after school or youth organizations such as Boys and Girls Club, you're welcome to sign up as well. So we the sky's the limit with us. Christian?
Yes. And, we have our Operation Mosquito Grid, which is what Miss Ayala's students were working on. And we also have our Vector Inspector program. And both of those get students out into their backyards, eliminating items that can grow mosquitoes, and provide students with the tools, like we talked about, the oviposition cups that vector ecologists use for mosquito surveillance. So students really, really love it. It's exciting. They get to go out and do science. So we have our citizen science is in the fall, and we have programs for elementary and middle school. And we also are looking to partner with high school teachers to do our elementary water analysis. So if you're a teacher out there who's interested in this, please let us know. And we've had high school students participate before, and they really liked it. They learned a lot of different science skills. So it'll be great if anyone's interested. And you can go onto our website on vectoreducation.org and click on that Book Now button that you see, and book any of our programs. And on our website, we have the full list of our programs. So feel free to check it out and book whenever you're ready.
Thank you so much, Caroline and Christian, for the input on or providing information about that. So if you're interested in any of the free programs we offer at the district, San Gabriel Valley Mosquito and Vector Control District, vectoreducation.org is your destination for that. At this point, I want to go ahead and move into closing remarks. This journey has been really fun. The past 45 minutes has actually flown by for me. But I want to just give our special guests some time to provide some closing remarks about anything that comes to mind. So we'll start off with the same way we introduced them. So Dr. Kelley Lee, would you like to provide some closing remarks to our viewers and to anyone who's watching?
I just wanted to thank you all for tuning in today and for hearing all of us and our differing perspectives, although I think we have many shared passions here together. We all are advocating in our own way for a better and more just future for young people. So again, thank you for tuning in today. And if you are in need of resources or thinking of ways to align to 21st century issues, please do check out some of those links that I've shared. But again, there's no way that we can effectively take action on this alone. It's important that we link up with our local organizations, our local researchers, universities, classroom teachers, our community. Together we can amplify, our collective efforts. So again, thank you so much.
Thank you. And Dr. Kelley Lee's links will be shared on the bitebackchampion.org webpage. Be sure to go there to check them out. Next, closing remarks from Dr. Hueling Lee.
Echo Kelley's points about really appreciating the opportunity to be here and being able to kind of talk about these various topics and learning from each other as well. And I want to kind of come back to the importance and relevance of learning. And, education for the most part has been really about the academic part in terms of introducing information. And what I love about what we're trying to do here is to talk about the application of that learning and kind of just, getting messy with it and really kind of interacting with it. And I think if we think about what's happening to, what learning is in the classroom, I see it as classroom provides the initial learning in terms of the general abstract concepts that generally exist. And then you have to have some sort of, kind of meaningful engagement with that learning. And then the classroom could also provide that opportunity to reflect so that students could also, delve deeper in that learning. And as I mentioned, I've been working around the state seal civic engagement for the past few years. And what we've been trying to do is to use that seal as a lever to push for more relevant, rigorous, and engaging learning. And so if you're interested in learning a bit more about that, you go to civicseal.org so that we can kind of talk about how science actually is very important in terms of our, preparing our citizens to be effective citizens in the world and society.
Thank you so much. And our 2021 Public Health Teacher of the Year, Mrs. Gina Ayala.
I just want to say thanks again for thinking of teachers when you're trying to get, information out to a community, because by getting my students involved, parents, and you've heard this, Carol Ann, it works exponentially, because what the kids know, parents from 2 years ago are saying, my daughter never lets me leave anything with water in it. She keeps dumping it out. So the work happens, but it goes on exponentially because you allowed us to get students involved who then go home and keep on spreading. So thanks for that. And we're going to keep on doing it.
We saw that last night with the board member who said that her kids in your class would not allow her to collect any water. It was pretty funny. All right.
Thank you all so much. This does conclude our first episode of season 2 of the Bite Back Tour Educator Spotlight, where we talked about 21st century science education. Are we ready? With that, we will end this feed. If you're watching this in the future, go back to bitebackchampion.org to see past special guests. If you need to reach out to any of our guests directly, you can do so. We'll have links to their contact information if they provide them. With that, thank you all for tuning in. Stay safe, stay curious, and stay bite free.